Good morning, everybody. This is Dr. Patmos, and I have an important video for you today. It is March the 5th, and we are well into nearly a week on this war with Iran. Let me just say up front, I'm no fan of Iran. I'm glad that the Iranian leadership has been toppled. I'm a strong supporter of Israel. I remember when the Ayatollah took over Iran in 1979. Felt back then that that was a catastrophic event, and I thought that we should have intervened right away. I'm glad that their leadership has been decimated. I fear, however, that these kinds of conflicts worsen over time, and they never go as easily as you think, and that we're going to get stuck in something much longer, and that Iran's allies eventually could be drawn in. 82% of Iran's crude oil goes to China. China needs Iranian oil. Right now, that oil is not flowing. So this is impacting China's economy directly, and that result impacts their national security. Russia's primary revenue source, where Russia gets their money from, is from selling their oil. And if the United States takes over Iranian oil production, as we have done in Venezuela, we could then flood the market with oil, which would drop the cost and hurt Russia economically and its national security. And that could draw them into the conflict to protect their oil revenue. So this could get very complicated very fast, especially if China and Russia get involved, and it could worsen the situation for Israel, which is my concern. All it would take is some retaliation from those countries against Israel, and then Israel will put itself in a worse position than it was before. Anyhow, that's all beside the point of the presentation today. You know, being a former healthcare C-suite executive, and with a master's degree in business, I always ask the finance questions. What are the finances around all of this? So I thought, it begs the question: how much is this incursion into Iran costing, and how are we paying for it? It's not free. We don't have the money in the treasury, so how are we funding this? And what's it going to cost? Well, I think the best way to look at that is to ask, well, what did the wars in Iraq cost? And what did the war in Afghanistan cost? And how did we pay for that? And the American taxpayers need to know this. You need to know this. Ask yourselves a question: how did we pay for the wars in Iraq? What did they cost? And the war in Afghanistan, what did it cost? And has that tab been picked up yet? Well, first of all, the very first action in Iraq was limited and brief and cost, $81 billion. A lot of that cost was shared among coalition partners. So that one wasn't a budget breaker, though it certainly was an expense. It was the second Iraq war where we kind of were on our own, and we spent a lot of money, hundreds of billions of dollars on that one. In fact, the total tab for the Iraq wars combined was about $2.5 trillion. Now, when you add in interest and all the other related expenses, it goes up from there. What about Afghanistan? Afghanistan was an unmitigated disaster. We were stuck there for, I think, 9 years, and we lost soldiers in Iraq. We lost soldiers in Afghanistan. There were a lot of soldiers who were killed and maimed in those conflicts. So there's always the human cost. But the point of this video is to just ask the finance question. What does this cost, and how are we paying for it? Well, Afghanistan cost also over a couple of trillion dollars, about $2.3 trillion. And so the total cost of Iraq wars and Afghanistan wars exceeds $5 trillion. When you add in the broader costs on the war on terror, we're talking about $8 trillion. That's a lot of money. Now, here's the important question: how did we pay for it? We didn't. We put it on a credit card. Here's the important thing people don't understand: the United States has no money. We're going from emergency stopgap spending bills and government shutdowns to fund the government because We have no money. The United States doesn't have a big bank account with billions and trillions of dollars sitting there that we can use to fund this stuff. We have to borrow this money. So all of the money we spent on Iraq, Afghanistan, and that we're now spending every day in Iran is borrowed money that we don't have. So the federal government goes to where the federal government goes to borrow money. And that debt goes into the national debt. Now you know why our national debt has soared from $10 trillion dollars in around 2008 and 9 and 10 up to now nearly $40 trillion dollars. So what is the national debt is money that the United States government has borrowed in your name. You're responsible for that debt. It will come out of your wallet, US taxpayers. That debt is now standing at nearly $40 trillion dollars. And a lot of it, about at least $5 trillion dollars of it, and probably a little bit more, was for these wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And now we're adding to that debt even more. We don't have that money. We have no way to pay for this. We're borrowing every day. In fact, Trump just went to Congress the other day and asked for $51 billion to fund what he's now doing in Iraq, in Iran, which I'm not, in disagreement with the intent. I'm just raising a red flag of caution about what it costs financially and what the potential, how it could go wrong. And it could go wrong, very, very wrong. And that very wrong could be very bad for Israel. Anyhow, so we don't have this money, and we have to look at the overall financial health of the United States. We have nearly $40 trillion national debt. How does that compare to our GDP? Well, it's 124% of our GDP. In other words, our national debt, our debt to GDP ratio, is 124%. That's like when you apply for a mortgage and they look at your debt to income ratio. Our debt is bigger than our entire economy. And economics research shows that when debt to GDP ratio exceeds 100%, that no country has been able to sustain that without financial collapse. So a debt to GDP ratio of 124% is a very big red flag. That would be like you going into the bank and trying to borrow money when you're over your head in debt as it is. No bank is going to lend you money like that, or it's going to cost you a tremendous amount of interest. Well, the national debt isn't just isn't it? There's more to it than that, to our financial health. There's also a thing called unfunded liabilities, and those are obligations that the federal government has made under law that we are obligated to pay. This is not money we borrowed. This is future expenses that we are committed to paying that we have no way to pay for, unfunded liabilities. That would be like you agreeing in writing to pay for your children's college education in the future, even though you don't have that money and you have no idea what it's going to cost you. So our unfunded liabilities now stand at about 110, 120 trillion dollars. Well, that's a big number. How does that compare? My friends, that's bigger than the entire world's GDP. All the money in the world doesn't add up to what the United States is committed to paying in the future. So how are we ever going to pay those unfunded liabilities? The reality is we can't. We have made obligations to pay for things that we have no way to pay for, and there's no conceivable way that we will ever generate that much money to pay for them. So we have. Now, what about our budget? Is our budget in good shape? No. Currently, we spend more than we take in. We're living above our means. The federal government is spending $1.7 trillion more than it has, and we're spending a lot more every day now than we have. We don't have the money to pay for any of this. We're putting it all on a credit card. So to put this into a personal analogy, here's how the United States is acting as if it were a consumer. Let's say it was you, and you had a job and you had income, but you were borrowing money, putting things on your credit card that you can't afford, and running up your credit card debt higher and higher and higher every day, so that you owe more on your credit cards than what you earn. And you know how the interest charges add up on credit cards? Do you know what the interest charge is that the United States is paying right now on all the money we've borrowed? It's nearly $1 trillion a year. We spend nearly $1 trillion a year just to make the minimum monthly payment on our debt without touching the principal. So it's like a consumer who's living on plastic and buying cars and boats and planes and all kinds of houses and things and borrowing for all of it, not having any way to pay for it other than with plastic, and then just running up the debt higher and higher and higher. If you did that, you would you would be a bad credit risk, and the banks wouldn't loan you any money. If your children did that, you'd probably scream at them. If your spouse did that, you'd probably end up getting divorced. But this is what we are doing as a country. We are, by the way, the most indebted nation in the world. In fact, we're the most indebted, financially indebted nation in world history. The United States owes a lot of money. We have a debt of nearly $40 trillion. That's way bigger than our economy. So all the money in the United States and all the economic activity in the United States pales in comparison to our debt. So as much as I support the fact that we needed to do something in Iran, I have to be a voice of caution about a couple of things. One, what it's going to cost, and who has to pay for. Eventually, this has to be paid for. This isn't going to be just someone isn't going to come along and just write off this debt. It has to be paid for, and who's going to pay for it? You are. How are you going to pay for it? Taxes and tariffs, which you're paying for now, which are actually just a form of taxes. And taxes are going to have to go up much, much further. And someday we're going to have to pay this debt. So spending is going to have to come down. I think the United States will one day have to go into a period of extreme austerity, sort of like what Greece did when it got into a similar situation. We're going to have to go into extreme austerity and raise taxes very, very high just to begin to make any kind of headway on this debt. We're just borrowing ourselves into oblivion. This, by the way, is how the Roman Empire went down. If you know your history, the Roman Empire was on a empire building thing, expanding their reach to northern Europe and all over the place, and they were borrowing money to pay for it all, and eventually they just went broke. Well, the United States is pretty much broke. We don't have enough money. We're going to have to do an emergency stopgap spending thing in the next few weeks because the government's going to run out of money. So you might ask yourself the question: where's the money coming from for all of this military activity? We don't have it. We're borrowing it. It's on your American Express card, and guess who's going to get the bill? You will.